The year his company went bankrupt, Ethan Cole sold himself to the Vance family to settle the debt. At the direction of Eleanor Vance, he married into the family, becoming the husband of her only daughter, Isabelle. But at the time, Isabelle's heart belonged to another man, Julian Croft. She was even willing to renounce her position as heir for him. Her mother, however, forced the marriage by threatening to take her own life. On their wedding day, Julian impulsively married someone else and left the country. Isabelle, racing to the airport to stop him, got into a car crash and missed him for good. After that, she blamed Ethan for the pain of losing the love of her life. From that day forward, everything Ethan did for her came with a price tag. The first year of their marriage, Isabelle fired the entire household staff, leaving Ethan to do all the chores. $1 per task. He worked nearly around the clock, injuring his back so badly that on rainy days, the pain made him tremble. The second year, when the Vance family opened a new luxury mall, Ethan was ordered to play the piano in the grand atrium. $10 a song. He played for 3 months straight, until his fingers bled and his wrists fractured from exhaustion. The third year, his father fell from a building and needed emergency surgery. Ethan had no choice but to beg Isabelle for help. But she, in front of her friends, made him drink high-proof scotch, $100 a glass, in exchange for the surgery funds. Through a haze of cigarette smoke, Isabelle's expression was mocking, blurring the sharp, picturesque lines of her beautiful face. Ethan stood in the warm air blowing from the vents, yet he shivered from a deep, internal cold. He coughed, his throat raw. His voice was a shredded whisper. "Isabelle, I have a severe alcohol allergy. Can we do something else?" "No." Isabelle's voice was ice. She stubbed out her cigarette, her eyes filled with a resentment he knew all too well. "From a moment you conspired with my mother behind my back, forced me into this marriage, and drove Julian away, you lost the right to negotiate with me." She pointed a contemptuous finger at the glass. "Drink. For every glass you finish, I'll give you the money." The eyes of the onlookers, filled with amusement and scorn, bored into him. Ethan's heart sank lower and lower. But time was running out. He had no other choice. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, his expression was utterly calm. "Fine, I'll drink." With that, he took a crystal tumbler in one hand and the bottle of scotch in the other, pouring and drinking without pause. His father was bleeding internally. He needed a lot of money. The $2,000 bottle of scotch might as well have been tap water. Soon, his body grew numb, his breathing labored. Yet he kept drinking, one glass after another, the empty bottles piling up on the table like a small mountain. Isabelle's expression grew darker, her hands clenching into white-knuckled fists in her lap. He didn't stop until his body gave out, until he couldn't breathe, and the glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor. He doubled over, clutching his mouth, coughing violently as blood trickled through his fingers. Still, he reached for a new glass. Isabelle finally shot to her feet, grabbing his wrist. The derision in her eyes burned him. "Ethan," she sneered, "when you schemed your way into this family, did you ever imagine that one day you'd be begging like a dog for a few $1,000s in medical bills?" Her nails dug deep into his skin, drawing blood, but Ethan's expression remained unchanged. He spoke with a chilling calm. 999 glasses. Wire the money to my account." Isabelle said nothing, her eyes a storm of complex emotions. As they stood locked in a standoff, her phone buzzed. She answered, and her assistant's excited voice came through the line. "Ms. Vance, Mr. Croft is divorced and flying back to the States. His plane lands in half an hour." Isabelle's eyes lit up. Without a second of hesitation, she shoved Ethan aside and strode away. No longer able to hold on, Ethan vomited a great mouthful of blood. The people around them cried out in alarm, but Isabelle didn't even slow her pace. Ethan let out a faint, scornful laugh before darkness consumed him. When he woke up, his throat felt like it had been seared with a hot poker. He couldn't speak for the pain. A nurse looked at him with concern. "Mr. Cole, the alcohol-induced severe laryngeal edema and gastric bleeding. There may be permanent damage." Ethan wasn't surprised. A wave of relief washed over him. At least his father's surgery was paid for. Just then, his father's attending physician called. The voice on the other end was heavy with regret. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cole. Your father passed away 5 minutes ago. Please accept my condolences." The words struck Ethan's heart like a sledgehammer. He could barely breathe. Tears streaming down his face, he ran to his father's room, arriving just in time to see the doctor pulling a white sheet over the body. His legs gave out, and he nearly collapsed, catching himself just before he hit the floor. He dragged himself to his father's bedside on his knees, his eyes so red they looked as if they might bleed. The doctor's voice was full of sympathy. There are no funds in the account, so we couldn't perform the surgery. We did everything we could. I'm so sorry. Ethan's head snapped up. He asked in a trembling voice, but I had the money sent. I did. The doctor and nurse exchanged confused glances and shook their heads. In disbelief, Ethan pulled out his phone, opened the hospital's payment portal, and refreshed it again and again. But the balance remained at zero. After his father's body was moved to the morgue, he called Isabelle like a man possessed. On the 123rd call, she finally answered. Ethan's voice was a raw, broken roar. Isabelle, you said if I drank, you'd pay for my dad's surgery. Why didn't you send the money? There was silence on the other end, but for a split second, he heard her breath catch in a rare moment of guilt. A searing pain tore through Ethan's chest, his voice twisting into something unrecognizable. Don't you know? Because you didn't send the money, my father. It's been 3 years, Mr. Cole. Are you still so obsessed with money? You forced your way into the Vance family for money then, and now it's all you could talk about. A cool, male voice cut in, laced with a mix of pity and disapproval. Mr. Cole, since you are Isabelle's husband, you should have some composure. You can't measure everything in terms of money. It's so vulgar. Hearing that condescending tone, Ethan couldn't stop himself from retorting. That was my father's life. Enough. Isabelle's voice cut him off. I didn't send the money because you didn't drink enough. You also broke 2 bottles of my best scotch. Ethan, rules are rules. You failed to meet the terms, so don't blame anyone else. As she finished, Ethan's phone pinged. He looked down. Isabelle had sent him $1. Is that enough? Isabelle's voice dripped with scorn. The Cole residence is only on the 2nd floor. A fall from her couldn't possibly be that critical. Ethan, don't be so greedy. A chill spread through Ethan's heart. Before he could say anything else, he heard a clerk's deferential voice in the background. Ms. Vance, this Rolex is valued at over $1 million. It would suit Mr. Croft perfectly. Julian's voice, slightly elevated, demurred. Isabelle, I've told you, I don't care for such vulgar things. And I'm not ready to rush into a new relationship. Love is exhausting. I need to live my own life. Isabelle's laugh was indulgent. Then consider it a divorce gift. She hung up without another word. Listening to the dial tone, Ethan's tears finally ran dry. The watch Isabelle casually gave Julian was worth $1 million. His father's life was worth one. Ethan forced himself to go and process his father's death certificate. The doctor, trying to be kind, offered some comfort. Mr. Cole, your father jumped from the 10th floor. He was determined to die. Even with surgery, there was a high probability he would have ended up in a vegetative state. Don't blame yourself too much. It felt like an icy blade twisting in his heart. The pain turned his face white. Isabelle had been wrong about one thing. He wasn't greedy. He sold himself to the Vance family for one reason only, to keep his only remaining family member from a dead end. And now, the money he had saved over the years, combined with his father's life insurance payout, was just enough to pay back the Cole family's debt to the Vances. He had worked for 3 years, only to settle the debt with his father's life. So be it. This way, he and Isabelle were even. It was time to leave. Ethan booked a flight for 2 weeks later. He would go to a foreign country and live out the rest of his life in freedom. For the next 3 days, his social media feeds and the news were filled with updates about Isabelle and Julian. Day 1. Isabelle bought Julian a boutique mountain lodge in the Catskills. Julian posted a picture of his divorce decree on Instagram with the caption, "From now on, I am my own great love." Ethan, running on fumes, arranged his father's funeral, burying him next to his mother, who had died in childbirth. Day 2. Isabelle donated 2 libraries to Julian's alma mater. Julian posted a photo of himself giving a speech, captioned, "So great to be back in my alma mater. A man needs to have substance to earn everyone's respect." Ethan collapsed from exhaustion and grief and was rushed to the emergency room again. Day 3. Isabelle bought Julian a yacht. Julian posted a photo of himself reading on deck, captioned, "Money and love are fleeting. All I seek is this view of the sea." Ethan withdrew the insurance money and drove to the Vance family estate. He handed a bank card to Eleanor Vance and stated his intentions. Eleanor studied him. "Ethan, you've been with Isabelle for 3 years. Are you sure you want to leave?" Ethan nodded firmly. "Mrs. Vance, Julian is back. Isabelle still loves him. It's time for me to step aside." Eleanor found no trace of guile in his eyes and could only sigh. "Years ago, I was drowning and your mother saved me. That's why I helped out when your family went bankrupt. I thought you and Isabelle could build a life together. But I see she still can't let go of Julian. Very well. You were never legally married, and the wedding was never completed. If you want to go, then go. Ethan thanked her and left the estate, taking an Uber back to the house he shared with Isabelle. As he got out of the car, someone clamped a cloth over his mouth and nose, and the world went black. When he came to, his hands were bound, and he was lying on a cold floor. Across from him stood Isabelle and Julian, both looking calm. Ethan's eyes filled with a blood-tinged confusion. Isabelle, why am I here? Julian has taken an interest in a rare manuscript, she said. The only copy belongs to a collector named Marcus Thorne. He said he would trade it for you. The dim light cast a cold sheen on Isabelle's delicate features. Her eyes were devoid of emotion. She looked at Ethan as if he were an object to be traded. Ethan was stunned. Marcus Thorne, the man who had orchestrated the collapse of his family's company, the one who had driven them into bankruptcy. His voice trembled. Isabelle, is a book really more important than my reputation in my life? Mr. Cole, that's not the right way to put it, Julian interjected, his expression one of mild disapproval. A man's reputation is merely a construct of power and money. Compared to a priceless piece of literature, it's nothing. At that, Ethan couldn't help but laugh, a bitter, mocking sound. The watch on Julian's wrist, the bespoke suit he wore, they were all from exclusive designers. His outfit alone was worth $500,000. His hypocrisy was staggering. But Isabelle, of course, agreed with him completely. Ethan, Julian has lost his appetite over this manuscript. You drove him away 3 years ago. This is a debt you owe him. It's time to pay it back. In Ethan's eyes, her face began to blur. He never could have imagined her heart was so cold she would wish him dead. Thankfully, he had remained clear-headed these past 3 years. He had never loved her, so this wouldn't break his heart. Seeing Ethan stop struggling, Isabelle assumed he had consented, and the tension in her brow eased slightly. She offered a soft word of comfort. Don't worry, I'll come get you tomorrow, and I'll find the best doctors for your father. At the mention of his father, a sharp, needle-like pain pierced Ethan's heart. His smile was bleak. There's no need. He's all ready. Before he could finish, the door opened, and a man he knew all too well walked in. Julian approached Marcus Thorne and extended a hand. Here's the person you wanted. Can I have the book now? Of course. Mr. Croft, you're a man of your word. Thorne handed him a book. Ethan could see it clearly. It was nothing more than a cheap paperback you could find at any street stall. Julian flipped through it casually, then turned to leave with Isabelle. Isabelle, a primal need to survive, made Ethan call out to her. Don't leave me here. Julian's calm voice cut him off. My lecture is about to start. We can't be late. Isabelle immediately forgot about Ethan and followed Julian out the door. The door clicked shut, and Ethan's heart plunged into an abyss. Thorne strode forward and slapped him hard across the face twice. His cold smile was laced with deep malice. Well, my dear nephew, you sold yourself to the Vance family to escape my grasp, and now your own wife has delivered you right into my hands. Years ago, Thorne had tried to trick Ethan's father into giving up company secrets. Robert Cole had beaten him for it, and from then on, the two families were enemies. If Ethan hadn't married into the Vance family, Thorne would have devoured him without a trace after the bankruptcy. And now, the woman he had shared a bed with for 3 years had personally handed him over to the devil. With his hands bound, Ethan was powerless. Thorne set up a camera, then called in a group of bodyguards and ordered them to beat Ethan. A hailstorm of fists and feet rained down on him. The pain felt like his organs were being rearranged, but it only made his mind clearer. When he started spitting up blood, Thorne ordered the men to stop. He grabbed a fistful of Ethan's hair, forcing his head up for a photo. In that instant, Ethan lunged forward, smashing his forehead into Thorne's nose. Thorne collapsed, howling in pain and clutching his face. The bodyguards rushed to grab Ethan, blocking all the exits. In desperation, Ethan ran to the window. Gauging the 3-story drop, he leaped without hesitation. Crunch! He slammed onto the roof of a car, blood pooling beneath him like a small stream. Every time he opened his mouth, more blood poured out. His body slid down the windshield, and his eyes met the shocked gaze of Isabelle in the driver's seat. Ethan! Isabelle gasped. She threw open the door and rushed to check on him. The panic on her face, the fear in her eyes, it was a look he had never seen before. The world seemed to fall silent. All Ethan could hear was Isabelle's ragged breathing. She reached out to touch him, but when her fingers met the thick, warm blood, she recoiled as if stung. Her trembling voice was for him, or maybe for herself. I'm calling an ambulance right now. You're going to be okay. Ethan managed a tragic smile, which sent him into a fit of racking coughs, choking on his own blood. He wanted to say, "Why are you pretending? Isabelle, weren't you the one who handed me over to that monster?" But he couldn't say a word. Life was draining out of him. He was losing too much blood, and a deep chill set in, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. He heard the approaching siren, its sound growing from a distant wail to a piercing shriek, and fixed his hopeful gaze on the paramedics rushing toward him with a stretcher. But just then, Julian, who had been silent all this time, let out a sharp cry of pain. He was clutching his right arm, where a small cut was bleeding steadily. Isabelle's attention snapped to him. She rushed to his side, her voice laced with an unprecedented urgency as she led him toward the ambulance. "Doctor, he has a clotting disorder. Get him to the hospital, quickly." The paramedic frowned, but the man on the car is obviously in more critical condition. Isabelle hesitated for a fraction of a second, but then Julian's head lolled to the side, and he fainted in her arms. Her decision was made. "I'm that man's wife," she declared. "I've decided. Save the man in my arms first." The paramedic, unable to argue with her, had no choice but to load Julian onto the stretcher. Amid the chaos, Ethan's eyes met Julian's. In those calm, clear eyes, he saw a chilling, detached indifference, as if he were nothing more than a stray dog to be abandoned. Despair washed over him. His strength faded, and he finally lost consciousness. He woke to the rhythmic beeping of machines. He was in a VIP hospital room, his body wrapped tightly in bandages. Every small movement sent waves of excruciating pain through him. A nurse checked his vitals. "Mr. Cole, you have a fractured tibia and 2 broken ribs, but thankfully your life isn't in danger." Ethan didn't have the energy for more than a nod of thanks before closing his eyes to rest. A short while after the nurse left, he heard voices from the hallway. "Mr. Croft only got a tiny scratch from the windshield, and Ms. Vance has been watching over him day and night. But Mr. Cole is hurt this badly, and she hasn't even come to see him. He's really out of favor." "Not necessarily. The man they brought into the ER today was the one who attacked Mr. Cole. I heard Ms. Vance had her bodyguards beat him until all 4 of his limbs were shattered. She even said not to kill him, but not to worry about him too much either. I think Mr. Cole still means something to her." Ethan listened, but his heart felt nothing. If Isabelle truly cared, she would never have thrown him to the wolves for a worthless book. Her actions were about one thing. He was her husband, and he had embarrassed her. For the next 3 days, Ethan recovered in the hospital while Isabelle dropped everything to accompany Julian. She hosted a symposium of renowned academics for him. She commissioned 100 bespoke suits and traditional garments from couturiers. When he expressed a fleeting interest in tea, she sourced the rarest varieties from around the world for him to sample. Ethan glanced at the news on his phone and then put it down. He used to have so many passions. His father had given him every opportunity, wanting him to experience the best life had to offer. But after the bankruptcy, after he married into the Vance family, his life was filled with endless chores. Isabelle hated him and wouldn't tolerate him having any hobbies in her house. Even buying a simple painting for decoration would earn him a lecture on his vulgar taste. It didn't matter. He had never considered this place his home. And in 9 days, he would leave forever, reborn and free. Ethan checked himself out of the hospital. He went to the police station to file a report on his injuries and Marcus Thorne's assault. By the time he was done, he was completely drained. He dragged his exhausted body home. He entered the security code several times, but each time it flashed access denied. He had no choice but to ring the doorbell. The next second, a bucket of ice-cold water was dumped on him from above, soaking him to the bone. Ethan cried out, his body shaking uncontrollably from the cold. Isabelle came rushing out of the house. She frowned at the chaotic scene in the yard, and when her gaze fell on Ethan, a rare flicker of concern crossed her face. She looked up at the second-floor balcony where the bodyguard stood, her voice sharp with an uncharacteristic anger. "What is going on here? What did you do?" It was the first time Isabelle had ever gotten this angry on his behalf. The bodyguards, unsure of what to do, looked past her to Julian, who had followed her out. Ethan's gaze followed theirs. Julian stood there in an embroidered suit, his posture exuding an air of detached superiority, like a crane in a flock of common birds. His expression was placid. "Mr. Cole has suffered a misfortune. He is carrying a negative aura. I thought of this method as a way to bless him, to cleanse him." He continued, "Furthermore, the water I used today was infused with a blend of precious herbs I prepare myself. It is beneficial for both mind and body. If you don't believe me, then so be it." His tone was as calm as ever, but to Ethan, The words were a grating insult. Just as Ethan was about to retort, Julian turned to walk away. Isabelle, looking anxious, made a snap decision. Since Julian meant well, let's just do it. Ethan was incredulous. Isabelle, I still have stitches. Just help him, Isabelle said impatiently, already rushing after Julian. With that, she was gone. The bodyguards took her words as an order. One on each side, they grabbed Ethan and continued to douse him with water. But this time, it wasn't just cold water. It was a foul-smelling herbal concoction, reeking of decay. 1 bucket, 2, 3. Ethan struggled to breathe, a dull, scraping pain tearing at his lungs as waves of nausea washed over him. After the 10th bucket, he was on the verge of suffocation. The bodyguards dropped him onto the gravel like a wet rag. He crawled back into the house, collapsing over the toilet in the bathroom and retching violently. But since he hadn't eaten, he only brought up bile and blood. Tears streamed from his eyes as the last of his strength drained away, and he passed out. When he woke again, it was early the next morning. He forced himself into the shower, threw away the soiled clothes, and treated his now-infected wounds before falling into a deep, feverish sleep. He was jolted awake by the slam of his bedroom door. Julian stood by the bed, tossing a folder onto him from a safe distance. Sign it. His voice was flat, as if speaking another word to Ethan would physically contaminate him. Ethan glanced at the document. Across the top, in bold letters, were the words, legal waiver. He laughed a raw, angry sound. Clutching his wounded side, he pushed himself up, his eyes locking onto Julian's with a newfound intensity. Why? He asked, his voice cold as steel. Julian's lips barely moved. You suffered no real loss. Why hold on to this? It only creates bad feelings. Sign the waiver so Isabelle can stop pursuing Mr. Thorne. Ethan's reply was merciless. And what, in your opinion, constitutes a real loss, Julian? For one of your worthless books, I was beaten half to death. If I hadn't reacted in time, I'd be dead right now. His gaze was sharper than it had ever been. Would that finally count as a loss in your eyes? Julian, taken aback by his ferocity, took a step back, his fingers tightening into a fist. Just then, Isabelle arrived. Julian looked at her, his expression a mask of proud resolve. Isabelle, the condition for me remaining friends with you was that you would help me acquire the rare manuscripts I need for my research. But now, because of Mr. Cole's lack of cooperation, I only have half the book. Are you going to handle this or not? Isabelle nodded without hesitation. Only then did Julian continue. Good. Then have Mr. Cole sign the waiver. That's the only way, Mr. Thorne will give me the second half of the manuscript. This time, however, Isabelle didn't agree immediately. She paused, her eyes turning to Ethan with a complicated expression. A knot of dread formed in Ethan's stomach. He spoke quickly. Isabelle, you're not actually going to force me to sign this, are you? She hesitated, looking helplessly at Julian. Isabelle, you were the one who came to me, Julian said, his voice laced with disappointment. You said if I stayed, you would help me achieve my dreams. Now you're the one breaking your promise. In just 3 short years, you deceived me twice. Is this vaunted devotion of yours really so fragile? He turned to leave, his gaze burning with disillusionment. Stung by his look, all of Isabelle's wavering vanished. She walked to Ethan's bed and picked up the waiver. Sign it. Let's just put this behind us. Ethan stared at her in disbelief. Isabelle, it's just a worthless book. Julian likes it, so it's worth it, she cut him off. Ethan, I have the videos and photos Marcus Thorne took. I hear the Cole family is trying to make a comeback. It would be a shame if the heir's reputation were tarnished by such negative press. She held up her phone. The familiar sounds of the beating echoed in the room, followed by a photo of Ethan's bruised and swollen face. It was like being thrown back into the nightmare. Trembling, Ethan snatched the waiver and pen, his voice a raw rasp. I'll sign. He scrawled his name, then threw the documents back at her before collapsing onto the bed in despair. His voice was as faint as the wind. Are you satisfied now? A flicker of pity crossed Isabelle's eyes, but she quickly looked away. She handed the waiver to Julian, who finally allowed himself a small, faint smile. Isabelle, he said, a hint of red coloring his earlobes, our manuscript restoration project will be grateful for your contribution. He paused. And so will I. With that, as if embarrassed, he strode out of the room. Isabelle savored his words, a fond smile playing on her lips as she followed him out. Ethan smiled a desolate smile and passed out again. Between the infected wound and the intense emotional turmoil, Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness for several days. 3 days later, his fever finally broke. He got up and began to pack his personal belongings. For 3 years, he had lived in this house like a ghost. He had arrived with a single small suitcase, and now he would leave with it just as it was. Any other miscellaneous items he had used at the Vance estate, he gathered in a box and threw in the trash. Next, Ethan returned to the old Cole family home to sort through his father's things. He would entrust the house to his extended family to manage, but the memories of his parents contained within its walls, those he would take with him to cherish for the rest of his life. The house was cold and empty. As Ethan entered his father's study for the first time since the bankruptcy, a wave of emotions washed over him. Every object he touched brought back the image of his father's unrecognizable body. It took him 2 full days, working in fits and starts, to get through it all. As he was finishing, he wiped down a decorative piece on his father's desk. With a soft click, a section of the bookshelf behind him slid open, revealing a hidden compartment containing a locked box. After a moment of surprise, Ethan found a hammer and broke the lock. Inside was a file he had never seen before. As he read through the documents, his heart began to pound erratically. The contents seemed to be related to his family's bankruptcy. His hands shaking, he found a trustworthy private investigator and sent the file over. As he was leaving the house, his father's former assistant called, his voice urgent. "Mr. Ethan, it's terrible. That amusement park your father built for you, miss. Vance has sent a demolition crew to tear it down." Ethan's chest tightened. He jumped in his car and sped toward the park. It wasn't just an amusement park to him. It was a repository of memories of his parents. They had started building it when he was born. When he was 5, his mother died, giving birth to his stillborn sibling. After that, every year his father would clear his schedule to take him to the park, to remember the happy times they'd had as a family of 3. It was derelict now, but he still went there sometimes just to sit. It was the only place he could find a moment of peace. And now Isabelle was tearing it down. On what authority? Ethan slammed on the brakes and ran into the park, just in time to see a wrecking ball smash into an angel statue carved in his mother's likeness. "Stop! Stop it!" Ethan's desperate screams were swallowed by the roar of machinery. He had no choice but to run forward, positioning himself directly in the path of a massive mechanical arm, which halted just an inch from his body. Isabelle, who was supervising the demolition, saw him. She ran over and yanked him out of the way, her face a mask of panic and fear she didn't even recognize. "Ethan, are you insane? Are you hurt anywhere?" He slapped her hand away and pointed at the surrounding rubble, his eyes filled with pain. "Who's the insane one?" "Isabelle. Who gave you the right to destroy the one thing my parents left me?" Guilt flickered in her eyes. She softened her voice, trying to explain. "Julian wants to open a manuscript restoration studio in the city, and this is the best location. Don't worry, I'll find a new site and rebuild the park for you, exactly as it was." "Who would want that?" Ethan's voice rose. "Isabelle, what gives you the right to make my decisions for me? I've paid back." "Mr. Cole, you're too impulsive," Julian interrupted. "A temperament like yours will only attract disaster. It's not good. As Isabelle's husband, you should practice restraint and cultivate your character. This kind of attachment to pleasure and material things is most unbecoming. By removing this place, I am helping you." As he spoke, Julian pressed a button on a remote control in his hand. In the distance, an explosion rocked the ground. "No!" Ethan cried out, a sound like tearing fabric. He lunged and snatched the controller, but it was too late. A series of explosions followed, one after another. Ethan could only watch as everything he cherished was reduced to dust and debris. He couldn't hold back any longer. He swung his fist and punched Julian hard across the face. His voice was a raw, agonized shriek. "Julian, why don't you just die?" The next second, Isabelle shoved him violently. He stumbled backward and fell hard, a sharp piece of rubble digging into his already injured ribs. Blood instantly soaked through his shirt. The pain turned his face white, and before he could recover, Isabelle was on him, her fingers digging into his shoulders. "Ethan, who gave you permission to hurt Julian in front of me?" But when she saw the blood spreading across his shirt, she froze. A drop of blood from the corner of Ethan's mouth landed on the back of her hand, and she recoiled as if burned, snatching her hand away. "Ethan!" Isabelle's voice was hoarse. She started to speak, but couldn't continue. In 3 years of marriage, this was the first time she had ever seen such profound grief on his face. She paused. "I'll make it up to you." "Make it up? With what?" "Isabelle, the wall Julian just blew up. That was where my parents and I pressed our handprints into the wet cement when the park was built. It was the only one." Isabelle's pupils contracted. She was about to speak when Julian let out a cold laugh. He clutched his swollen cheek, his eyes blazing with defiant pride. Isabelle, you said that if I came back to you, you would support me in whatever I did. A disappointed smile touched his lips. It seems I placed too much hope in you. He turned and strode away. Isabelle immediately followed, trying to explain. Just then, Julian stumbled and fell against a half-demolished statue. With a deafening crack and Isabelle's strangled scream, the statue toppled, crashing down on top of them. Blood stained the serene face of the angel carved in his mother's likeness. Outside the operating room, Julian, completely unharmed, sat calmly on a chair. The large bloodstain on his clothes might as well have been a splash of paint. Ethan, however, in his role as Isabelle's husband, had to swallow 2 painkillers and deal with the aftermath. Halfway through the surgery, a nurse rushed out. The hospital's blood bank is critically low. We need someone with type A blood to donate for Ms. Vance. As she spoke, Ethan saw Julian's brow furrow slightly, but he remained silent. Ethan's voice was cold. Ms. Vance was injured because of Mr. Croft. Aren't you going to donate? A flash of guilt, quickly replaced by annoyance and disgust, crossed Julian's face. Finally, he answered blandly, my health is delicate. Donating blood wouldn't be helping. It would be harming someone. Besides, I imagine Isabelle wouldn't want me to make such a sacrifice for her. Ethan scoffed internally. In the end, it was Isabelle's assistant who arrived and donated the blood. When the surgery was over, Julian didn't even bother to follow the gurney to the recovery room. He simply turned and left. The assistant blocked his path, her tone disapproving. Mr. Croft, Ms. Vance was hurt protecting you. You're just going to leave. Julian glanced at Isabelle's pale face and answered flippantly. I stayed with her through the surgery. That's thanks enough. And with that, he walked away without a backward glance. Ethan looked at Isabelle, lying unconscious and in pain, and felt that her profound devotion was nothing but a colossal joke. But from now on, whether they tore each other apart or remained a miserable couple, it had nothing to do with him. He helped wheel the gurney to her room, then left to have his own wounds treated. Afterward, he returned to the demolished amusement park to salvage what little remained of his parents' memory, boxing it up to be shipped away. By the time he finished, 2 days had passed. He needed to deposit the rest of his father's insurance money into an overseas account. But as he walked down the street, a speeding van screeched to a halt beside him, and he was dragged inside. Having been drugged before, Ethan knew to hold his breath this time. He feigned unconsciousness, secretly cracking his eyes open to memorize the route. He waited until the van was careening down a winding mountain road, making it impossible for the driver to see the back, before he fully opened his eyes. To his surprise, Julian was beside him, also bound and gagged. Ethan met his pleading gaze for a second before looking away. He pulled out a small box cutter he had managed to hide during the initial search and began to saw at his ropes. Halfway through, one of the kidnappers turned around, holding up a phone. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut. The kidnapper was on a video call with Isabelle. Ms. Vance, we have your husband and your pretty boy. Think carefully. You can only save one. Who will it be? How much do you want? I can give you anything. I want them both, Isabelle said, trying to sound calm, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her panic. The kidnapper laughed. Ms. Vance, we don't want a ransom. We just want you to feel the pain of losing someone you love. One new flame, one old love. Make your choice, or they both die. He ripped the tape from Ethan and Julian's mouths. Julian, losing all composure, screamed in terror. Isabelle, save me. I don't want to die. Isabelle didn't hesitate. Let Julian go. The hand sawing the rope faltered for a moment, then moved faster. Even though he had never expected anything from Isabelle, her cold-bloodedness still filled him with a sliver of despair. Fortunately, he had never planned on relying on her. While the kidnappers were still talking to Isabelle, Ethan sliced through the last of his ropes, threw open the van door, and jumped, rolling down the steep hillside. Amid Julian's frantic screams of "he's getting away," Ethan gritted his teeth and ran, tirelessly, down the mountain. He ran until his feet were bleeding, until he was running on pure instinct, his body screaming in protest. He finally reached a road and was picked up by a kind driver who took him to the police station. After giving his statement, Ethan had his wounds treated and returned home. A package from the private investigator was waiting for him. With a heart pounding like a drum, Ethan opened it and began to read. With every page, his heart sank deeper. Finally, he saw the date on the last report, the day before his father's fall, and the entire puzzle clicked into place. Eleanor Vance had been one of the primary architects of his family's ruin. She had done it for the reputation of being a benevolent savior, and for the Cole family's lucrative production lines, which she had coveted for years. She destroyed the evidence and forced Ethan into the marriage, hiding the truth for 3 long years. No wonder his father, so close to seeing the light, had jumped. No wonder he'd left behind the insurance money. A man who loved his son more than life itself could never have endured the pain of having sent him into a den of wolves. Ethan collapsed onto the floor and wept, a raw, cleansing torrent of grief. Then, he took the investigator's file and headed for the airport. Just as he was about to board, Isabelle called, her voice seething with rage. "Ethan, I thought you were just jealous of Julian, but I never imagined you were so venomous you would abandon him in his time of need. Do you have any idea?" "Isabelle," Ethan cut her off. "You made those enemies. You're the one who should be atoning for your sins." He hung up and boarded the plane. When he landed, it was the next morning in a new country. He turned on his phone, and it was immediately overwhelmed by a flood of missed calls and messages from Isabelle. He ignored them. Using most of the money he had left, he hired a tech specialist to use AI to generate thousands of videos documenting the abuse he had suffered at the hands of Isabelle and Julian. Then, using a program, he released them all online. That night, the internet in the United States virtually crashed. This was an all-or-nothing gamble for the rest of his life. If he failed to make the Vance family pay, he would have to live in hiding like a rat. But he had no other choice. He won. Supportive netizens created trending hashtags. Hashtag Julian and Isabelle toxic trash. Hashtag Zen master or fake saint. Hashtag Vance dynasty of abuse. Each one was propelled by an army of outraged users. Every time the Vance Corporation's PR team got one taken down, thousands more would spring up in its place. But with the support came a tide of skepticism. Am I the only one who remembers a different story? Isabelle was forced to marry Ethan, and Julian was forced to leave the country? If Ethan hadn't schemed his way in, why would two people in love have separated? I run in the same circles as the Vances. Everyone knows how greedy Ethan Cole is. I suspect all this so-called evidence of abuse was consensual on his part. With all these questions, Ethan Cole, do you dare to answer them in a live stream? Ethan read through the comments, absorbing all the mockery and slander. But he felt strangely calm. He had gotten their attention. The next phase of his plan was about to begin. Using a VPN, he registered a new account. His first post was a reply to the comment demanding a live stream. He wrote, "Fine, let's go live." He contacted international and domestic journalists, spreading the word. Within half a day, over 100 million people had signed up to watch the stream. Then he posted again, this time tagging the Vance Corporation's official account. The caption read, "They want the truth. I can give it to them. But what about the truth I want? Will you give that to me?" The post pushed the scandal to its tipping point. Isabelle's assistant, knowing the situation was out of control, tried calling her boss repeatedly, but there was no answer. Isabelle had silenced her phone. She was at the hospital, sitting calmly by Julian's side. When Ethan had jumped from the van, the kidnappers had taken all their anger out on Julian. By the time Isabelle arrived, she found him being dragged across the ground, his handsome, serene face covered in bruises. The good news was nothing worse had happened. The bad news was he was deeply traumatized. When Isabelle helped him up, his nails dug in her arm, drawing blood. His voice was like ice. "Isabelle, if Ethan hadn't jumped, I wouldn't have been subjected to this humiliation. You will get revenge for me. If you don't, I will never forgive you." Feeling the pressure on her arm, Isabelle couldn't quite name her emotions. The kidnapper today had been her business partner when she first started her own company. A corporate restructuring had pushed him out, and because of it, he couldn't afford the medical bills when his wife went into premature labor. She died on the operating table. Even though Isabelle had sent him money and resources to help him raise his frail daughter, he still grew to hate her. And today, he had kidnapped Ethan and Julian. So, in truth, she felt guilty toward Ethan. If she hadn't chosen to sacrifice him, he wouldn't have risked his life jumping from the van. But she was also angry that he hadn't trusted her. Her security team had been just minutes away. If she could have stalled for a little longer, they would have both been saved. But because Ethan didn't trust her, he jumped, and Julian got hurt. With this thought, Isabelle had tried to call Ethan, only to be met with a string of incomprehensible words before he hung up. After that, his phone was unreachable. But strangely, beneath her anger, she felt a flicker of relief knowing he had escaped. Now, having finally calmed Julian down, she sighed and turned her attention to dealing with the mess Ethan had created. She opened her phone and was met with a barrage of frantic messages from her assistant. Frowning, she called back. "What happened?" "Ms. Vance, you need to look online." "Mr. Cole, he's setting the world on fire." A stone dropped in Isabelle's stomach. She quickly opened a news app. The screen was flooded with Ethan's accusations against her. She tapped on a video, and the first thing she heard was Ethan's grief-stricken voice. "The day my father learned the truth about the bankruptcy, he lost the will to live. He jumped from the 10th floor, but was caught by an awning. He was rushed to the hospital. I begged Isabelle Vance to lend me the money for his surgery. She told me she would, but only if I drank enough. I drank, but she was in such a hurry to pick up Julian Croft that she left my father to die on a gurney." He held up his phone, showing the screen. On it was the absurd $1 transaction. Ethan's smile was tragic. A gift to appease Julian is worth over $1 million. The life-saving money I earned with half my own life was worth a $1 insult. Isabelle's hand trembled, and her phone slipped from her grasp, clattering to the floor. Ethan's father was dead, and she had killed him. Isabelle pressed her fist to her temples, trying to remember that day. What she had said, what she had done, why she had sent him that single dollar. From the phone on the floor, Ethan's voice continued to narrate the grotesque theater of the past few weeks. How she sold him to his enemy for a book. How she had him doused with 10 buckets of filthy water under the guise of cleansing bad luck, causing his wounds to become infected. How she blackmailed him with photos of his own beating to make him sign a waiver for his attackers. How she demolished the amusement park his parents built for him, and then blamed him after he was kidnapped. The events played out before her eyes like a horrifying slideshow. She finally understood the true extent of her cruelty. She wanted to tell herself she didn't know Marcus Thorne was his enemy, that she didn't know the herbal water would infect his wounds. But every subsequent act, which one of them hadn't been her decision. At the time, desperate to please Julian, she hadn't thought she was doing anything wrong. But now, listening to Ethan's raw, trembling voice, Isabelle knew just how monstrously wrong she had been. But as the video ended, she quickly found a way to absolve herself. If Ethan hadn't pushed his way into Julian's rightful place, Julian would never have left the country. He wouldn't have suffered through a bad marriage and a bitter divorce. He wouldn't have transformed from a man full of passion for life into this cold, lifeless shell. That's right. It was all Ethan and the Cole family's fault. They were the ones who had made her suffer the agony of being separated from her love for 3 whole years. What was happening now was exactly what they deserved. Isabelle looked down at her phone's wallpaper. It was a picture of a passage from one of the letters Julian had sent her when they were pen pals. Whenever she felt unsettled, reading his words calmed her down. Julian was her medicine, her salvation, the only person she had ever loved. She took several deep breaths and ordered her assistant to find Ethan's location, no matter the cost. She told the entire PR department to work through the night to come up with a counter-strategy. And when Ethan's live stream began, she started recording, determined to see what new spectacle he was staging. But when the broadcast started, the image that filled her screen was a stark white hospital room. Ethan, shirtless and covered in wounds, sat on the edge of the bed with an M4 in his arm. His smile was pale. "My apologies, everyone. The recent travel has aggravated my condition, so I have to speak to you from here." The surgical scars, the bruises from the fall, the cuts from the kidnapping, they stood out in stark relief against his pale skin and gaunt frame. It was a shocking sight. His expression hardened. "I'm here today to bring a long-buried story to light. The bankruptcy of the Cole family was not just the work of Marcus Thorne. The most important player behind the scenes was the Vance family. It was your mother, Eleanor Vance." The words were a deafening roar, a hammer blow to Isabelle's heart. Isabelle, who had always been unflappable, who had flawlessly navigated every crisis since taking over the Vance Corporation, was now frozen. Seeing the damning evidence Ethan presented, she felt paralyzed, suffocated. The documents proved it. 3 years ago, an illicit payment was made from Eleanor Vance's account to a rival of the Cole family. Furthermore, one of her mother's closest confidants had met with that same rival to poach a key business partner, severing a vital link in the Cole supply chain. They had even bribed a senior executive at Cole Industries to steal their entire operational plan for the next quarter. Because so much time had passed, and because of the Vance family's immense power, everything had been done with meticulous secrecy, leaving her mother seemingly blameless. The evidence wasn't a smoking gun that could lead to a conviction. But Isabelle, of Vance herself, knew exactly what she was looking at. She couldn't even meet the burning gaze of the man on the screen. But his voice, cold and filled with a profound hatred, seeped into her ears. "Isabelle, I can say with a clear conscience that I did nothing wrong after marrying into your family. But can you answer me this? Did all my suffering originate with you and your mother?" Isabelle frantically shut down the live stream. She gripped her phone, her hands shaking, and lightly banged her head against them again and again. If she had been blaming the wrong person all along, then what had she done to Ethan? She felt her breath catch, and a sharp pain flared from her surgical wound. She needed her pain pump. She needed Julian's comfort to calm her down. With that thought, Isabelle hurried toward Julian's room. But just then, a message from her assistant popped up on her screen. MS. Vance, I think you need to know that Julian and his ex-wife have known each other for many years. And she's someone you know very well. Julian woke up in the middle of the night with a sudden sense of unease. He opened his eyes and saw Isabelle standing by his bed, a dark, menacing silhouette against the faint light from the hallway. His heart leaped into his throat. He sat up, a curse on his lips. But then he remembered his carefully crafted persona and forced himself to swallow his panic, feigning his usual calm. He frowned. What is it? Why are you just standing there in the dark? Isabelle didn't speak. She just stared at his face. Julian wasn't conventionally handsome, nor did he have the innate polish of someone from old money. Compared to Ethan's fine, aristocratic features, he was rather plain. But after he got together with Isabelle, she had poured money into him. Grooming, shopping, private tutors, transforming him from a man of humble origins into someone who looked like the meticulously cultivated heir of a dynasty. Isabelle's life was a constant battle of wits and deception. Only with Julian could she feel a sense of peace. But now, her tranquilizer, her painkiller, was broken. When she continued to remain silent, Julian smelled the stale smoke clinging to her clothes and felt a surge of irritation. His voice sharpened with anger. You smell like smoke. I don't like it. Go change. But this time, Isabelle, who always catered to his every whim, didn't move. Instead, she asked him a seemingly irrelevant question. 3 years ago. How did you know I was getting married? That was 3 years ago. I've already forgiven you for the pain you caused me. Why are you digging up the past? Julian's expression was placid, but under the covers, his nails were digging into his palms. He didn't know why she was bringing this up now, what answer she wanted. But the woman standing before him terrified him. She was like a wolf, poised to strike, ready to snap her prey's neck in an instant. And he was the prey? But what Julian didn't know was that Isabelle saw right through his poorly concealed anxiety. She had become CEO of the Vance Corporation at the age of 20. Her abilities were not to be underestimated. Before, she had seen him through the filter of love, believing him to be perfect. But now, with the investigator's report fresh in her mind, she felt not a shred of pity for him. Meeting his terrified gaze, Isabelle clapped her hands. Bodyguards filed into the room, dragged him out of bed, and forced him to the floor. The mask of the serene intellectual shattered, replaced by a desperate, struggling man pleading for mercy. Isabelle, tell them to let me go. Ugh. Julian thrashed, trying to break free. But Isabelle just stood there with her arms crossed, watching him with the detached curiosity of someone observing an insect, a cruel smile playing on her lips. Julian, my wedding 3 years ago was a secret, she said finally, after he was gasping for air. Her words were like shards of ice, plunging him into a frozen hell. She had the bodyguards release him, then gently stroked his cheek. The gesture was intimate, but Julian felt as if he were about to die. Isabelle continued nonchalantly. The ceremony was deliberately kept from you. Besides my close friends and family, not even a fly could have gotten in. So how did you find out? And how did you manage to get a message to me that you were leaving? For the past 3 years, you vanished without a trace. No matter how many people I sent to find you, it was as if you never existed. Tell me, how did you manage to evade the Vance family's global network? And 3 years later, why did you suddenly reappear on the very day Ethan's father fell from that building? And how did my assistant just happen to find out and call me away at that exact moment, distracting me and causing me to miss the window to pay for Ethan's father's surgery? Isabelle's voice was a relentless interrogation, the pressure mounting with each question. Julian shook his head wildly, a choked gasp escaping his lips. He had suddenly lost the ability to speak. He panted, the air in the room thick with his despair. Isabelle found it amusing. She had been so in love with Julian that she believed everything he said, willing to tear out her own heart for him. But now, without the rose-tinted glasses, she saw him for what he was, a man riddled with inconsistencies. Her assistant, using the full power of the Vance network, had uncovered the truth with startling speed. Julian's ex-wife was the daughter of Marcus Thorne's wife's distant aunt. They had been elementary school classmates, childhood friends. Julian's entire existence in her life had been a meticulously crafted deception. His personality, his interests, the way they first met, all of it had been designed for her. Even the book he was reading that day, The very page it was open to had been staged. Back then, the Vance family was mired in internal power struggles. Her father was consumed by work, neglecting his family. Her mother, worn down by years of fighting with him, had lost all affection for their home. Isabelle, raised in this cold, loveless environment, was starved for affection. It was then that a pen pal entered her life, a breath of fresh air that soothed the perpetual frown on her face. After years of corresponding, Isabelle suggested they meet. At the designated bookstore, she saw Julian, dressed in a flowing white linen shirt. From that moment, he took root in her heart, and she began to pursue him relentlessly, determined to keep that sliver of moonlight in her life forever. But Julian always kept her at arm's length. "I'm a free spirit," he'd said. "I could never cage myself in a gilded mansion, a slave to marriage and love." Those words had spoken directly to her soul. He constantly fed her ideas about the supremacy of love over power. Isabelle, who had never known warmth, was completely won over, even contemplating giving up her inheritance for him. But looking back now, it was all so clear. At the time, her father's health was failing. The two main contenders for the company were her and her uncle, Arthur Vance. If Isabelle had walked away, Arthur would have been the sole beneficiary. And as it turned out, Julian's ex-wife had been one of Arthur's most capable aides. Who knew better what Isabelle needed than Arthur, the man who had watched her grow up, who knew every secret of the Vance family's inner turmoil. The 5 years she had spent chasing Julian, and the 3 years she had spent tormenting Ethan for him, 8 years of her life, had all been a part of a game orchestrated by her uncle. The most innocent victim in all of this was Ethan. And the most tragic event, his father's fall, had also been arranged by Arthur, a final, cruel move to break Ethan's spirit and clear the way for Julian. Arthur's years of scheming had been thwarted when Isabelle became CEO, and he was determined to make her suffer. He had used the Cole's tragic situation and Julian's influence to try and stage his own comeback. It was she, Isabelle thought, who had failed Ethan. She stood up, disgustedly wiping her hands with a handkerchief. She gave a cold look to the bodyguards. "Take Julian. Everything Ethan experienced, make him experience it tenfold." The following week was a living nightmare for Julian. Day 1, he was taken to a 30-foot-height bungee platform and forced to jump 10 times. He vomited until he was empty, but was denied even a glass of water to rinse his mouth. Day 2, he was tied to a chair in the courtyard while bodyguards poured 100 buckets of water over his head. The same foul, dirty water he had concocted, so pungent it made him pass out. He was left with half a life, spending 3 days in the ICU before being discharged. Day 6, pumped full of stimulants and nutrients, he was dragged to his supposed alma mater. In front of the entire world, his facade was ripped away. He wasn't a graduate of a prestigious university, but a middle school dropout who had been recruited by Marcus Thorne for his silver tongue, then trained and used as a pawn. His reputation was destroyed overnight. By then, Julian's mental state was fragile, but Isabelle wasn't finished. On the final day, she had him tied up and, in a live-stream broadcast, invited everyone he had ever wronged to take their turn beating him as the world watched. When Julian woke up and learned that his humiliation had been broadcast to millions, he descended into a fit of laughing and crying, a man gone mad. He tried to jump from a window, but was stopped by the bodyguards Isabelle had posted. He looked at her, sitting calmly in a chair, smoking a cigarette, and screamed, "Isabelle, whatever I did, I wasn't the mastermind. Why are you doing this to me?" Isabelle pressed the glowing tip of her cigarette into his cheek. Listening to his screams, she let out a soft laugh. "Don't worry. I'll get to all of you one by one. Everything you took from me, everything you owe me, I'll get it back." She stood up and nodded to the bodyguards. "Watch him. If he dies, I won't spare any of you." As she walked away, Julian's eerie laughter followed her. "You'll regret this, Isabelle. You will pay a terrible price for what you've done." She paused for a second, but didn't turn back. "I never regret anything." She walked out, missing the venomous, triumphant look in his eyes and the words he muttered under his breath. "You came so close to killing the one you truly love." After she left, Julian's mocking gaze haunted her. A sense of unease settled over her, a premonition that things were about to spiral out of her control. But she had no time to dwell on it. The company was on the brink of collapse. A full week had passed since Ethan's live stream, and the Vance Tech team still hadn't been able to locate him. They suspected he was protected by a powerful firewall, his IP address constantly being rerouted. The fallout from his revelations had been catastrophic for the Vance Corporation. Their products were being boycotted, with customers demanding refunds en masse. Long-term partners, seeing the writing on the wall, were paying hefty penalties to terminate their contracts. In just 1 week, the company's reputation had been shattered, its stock had plummeted, and shareholders were in open revolt, some publicly dumping their shares. The board's old guard, men who had known her since she was a child, were calling for her resignation. But Isabelle, though only 30, had learned from a young age that if she wasn't ruthless, if she had no value to her family, she would be cast aside. Her cunning and political acumen caught even the veterans off guard. With stunning speed, she crushed all dissent. The price of her victory was a week without sleep, fueled by nothing but cigarettes and coffee. She normally hated smoking, hated the way the smell clung to her, tarnishing her professional image. But in this 1 week, she had smoked more than she usually did in 6 months. Her office was thick with a toxic haze. She was averaging less than 4 hours of sleep a night, literally running on fumes. Everyone blamed Ethan, but Isabelle silenced them. She wasn't a saint. She had felt flashes of resentment at the brutal finality of his actions. But whenever she pictured the scars on his body, her anger would be extinguished by a wave of cold guilt. This was a debt she had incurred, one she could never repay. After 3 more grueling days, the company was stable for now. It was a shadow of its former self, but she was satisfied. As she tried to stand, a violent cramp seized her stomach, and she collapsed back in her chair. A searing pain shot through her lungs, a tickle that turned into a hacking cough. She curled into a ball on the floor, clutching her stomach, the pain of the spasms and the coughing fits overwhelming her until she coughed up a pool of blood and passed out. When her assistant found her, it was the next day. "Ms. Vance," she said, her face etched with worry, "you've been overworking yourself. Your body can't take much more of this. Let me take you to the hospital." Isabelle shook her head. "Everyone is watching the Vance family right now, especially my dear uncle, that backstabbing wolf. If I go to the hospital, he'll smell blood in the water." With her assistant's help, she got up, showered, and changed in her private bathroom, and swallowed a handful of pills. Once the pain subsided, she said she was going to the family estate. In the car, Isabelle clutched her still aching stomach. Her voice was raspy. "Do you think, when Ethan fell from that building, was the pain 100 times worse than this?" The assistant didn't answer the question. Instead, the assistant brought up something seemingly unrelated. "Ms. Vance, when you were injured at the amusement park saving Mr. Croft, he left as soon as your surgery was over. But Mr. Cole, he took painkillers and stayed with you for half the night." Hearing this, Isabelle felt 1,000 tiny needles prick her heart, making it even harder to breathe. The incident at the amusement park, she owed Ethan an apology she could never give. If she had known how much that place meant to him, she would never have agreed to Julian's outrageous demand, not even when she was madly in love with him. But what she couldn't comprehend was that after everything she had done to him, Ethan had still stayed by her side in the hospital. And Julian, she had given him everything, laid her heart at his feet for him to do with as he pleased, and he had never cared for her at all. In that moment, all the cruelty she had shown Ethan flashed before her eyes, mocking her for being so deaf and blind. She wished she could go back 3 years to meet Ethan Cole for the first time again. She would have been so good to him. Or better yet, she wished she could inflict upon herself every pain she had inflicted upon him. Only then, when she felt his pain, could he perhaps forgive her. But that was impossible. Her branch of the family depended on her. She couldn't let guilt make her abandon the company. But she could get revenge for him. As Isabelle pondered this, the car pulled up to the Vance family estate. The once grand, century-old mansion now looked somber and lifeless. Iron fences had been erected around the perimeter, patrolled by trained bodyguards. Inside, advanced signal jammers had been installed, cutting off all access to the outside internet. The occupants were prisoners in their own home. As Isabelle walked in, her mother, on the verge of a breakdown, rushed toward her, grabbing her shoulders. "Isabelle, you've had me locked up for a week. When are you going to let me out?" Eleanor Vance had spent the week in a living hell. She had never known hardship. Though her marriage was a business arrangement, her husband, for all his emotional distance, had never denied her anything material. She had always been the envy of her social circle, wealthy, idle, with a respectful husband and a successful daughter. But now, her daughter had cut her off from the world without explanation. The endless silence was a suffocating panic. "Isabelle, what is going on out there? Do you have any idea how the other wives will look down on me? Are you scared?" Isabelle interrupted the woman who could no longer maintain her facade of aristocratic grace. Her voice sounded distant, ethereal. "What?" Eleanor was stunned, unable to grasp her meaning. "When you had them ruin Ethan Cole's family, He felt just as helpless as you do now, Isabelle replied. The air seemed to freeze, stealing Eleanor's voice. She gasped, staring at the child of her own flesh and blood, a strange sense of dread creeping into her heart. She slowly released her grip, stumbling back a few steps. Her voice trembled. You know, Isabelle advanced on her. It's not just me. The whole world knows. They know the matriarch of the Vance family conspired to ruin a man's life for the sake of her daughter. Mom, for 3 years, Ethan waited on you hand and foot, showing you nothing but respect. I can forgive you for lying to me for 3 years. But how could you stand there and watch him be so humiliated in front of you day after day? By the end, Isabelle's voice was laced with frost, a biting, accusatory tone. Eleanor, already under immense psychological pressure, finally snapped. Her voice became shrill. I did it for you, she shrieked. The Vance family of this generation supposedly only has you as an heir, but in reality, your father has several illegitimate children your age out there. You were so headstrong, ready to throw everything away to chase after Julian. If I didn't find a way to protect your position, what was I supposed to do? She broke down, sobbing, which shocked Isabelle. Since she was a child, her mother had only cried twice. The first time she found out about her husband's affairs, and when Isabelle had her car accident. Now, Eleanor's grief was uncontrollable, her words tumbling out in a disorganized mess. At the time, I just wanted to create a small setback for the Cole family, to force Robert to give up his company's secrets. Who knew? She paused, her eyes filled with a regret that seemed to consume her. Who knew it would bankrupt them? Isabelle understood instantly. Her mother had let someone else do her dirty work, and then take the fall. She sighed heavily. Mom, from now on, you will stay here. You will pray, and you will reflect on what you've done. I'll gradually remove the guards and the jammers. And don't trust Aunt Martha anymore. Aunt Martha was Eleanor's best friend, who had married into the Vance family alongside her, becoming Arthur Vance's wife. Eleanor had been sheltered, but she wasn't stupid. She knew what Isabelle was implying, that when she had moved against the Coles, she had used her friend's family connections, and that friend had betrayed her for her own husband's sake. Eleanor collapsed onto the sofa, her eyes wide and vacant, filled with guilt and disbelief. Isabelle, overcome with frustration, couldn't bear to continue the conversation. She straightened her clothes and turned to leave. Suddenly, her eyes fell on an envelope on the coffee table. The elegant, flowing script on the front made her heart race. She snatched it up, her movements swift but careful. Inside was a single, thin bank card. Isabelle stared at the 2 words written on the enclosed note, debt paid. Her voice was a raw whisper. Mom, who gave this to you? She prayed for a different answer, but the name she dreaded to hear pierced her ears. No wonder Julian had said she would regret it. Isabelle swayed, on the verge of collapse. As her mother's trembling voice called after her, she fled the house. She raced to the home she had shared with Ethan and began to tear it apart, searching for anything connected to him. Nothing. There was nothing. The house was sterile, devoid of any sign that a man had ever lived there. It was like a cold, impersonal showroom, giving no hint that a couple had spent 3 years of their lives within its walls. But Isabelle clung to a sliver of desperate hope. She searched frantically, even checking under the rugs. She had to find proof, to know if Ethan was the man who had haunted her dreams for years. Finally, in a corner of the study, she found a small notebook, handmade from scrap paper left over from her printed documents. She opened it. The handwriting, like the man himself, was gentle yet resilient. The entries read, March 18th, did 25 chores. $25. March 19th, feeling sick. Bought the cheapest cold medicine. $5. March 20th, an old professor wants to buy one of my paintings. My favorite piece, the one I was most proud of. It can sell for $10,000 now. I'm so happy. I hope there will be more opportunities like this. It wasn't an account book. It was a chronicle of Ethan's soul. Isabelle clutched the pages, the calm, simple words twisting in her heart like a vice. She had known of Ethan Cole before. He was a rising star in their world, a genius investor, a concert pianist who had graced international stages, a scholar with an artist's soul. If not for his family's downfall, the life his father had so carefully cultivated for him would have been unimaginably brilliant. But now, because of a conspiracy, because of her mother's selfishness and her own misdirected rage, it was all destroyed. She turned to the last page. There was a single line of fresh ink. Isabelle, by the time you read this, we are enemies for life, never to meet again. Isabelle sank to the floor, despair flooding her. He had known. Ethan had recognized her all along. And she, blind and foolish, had destroyed the one person she had ever truly loved. Cognito, the name of her pen pal, a man of refined taste, quiet wit, and deep intellect. How could she ever have thought that was Julian, a man of such common stock? A soul-crushing despair consumed her. She threw her head back and let out a guttural scream, coughing up a great mouthful of blood before darkness swallowed her whole. 1 year later, in a picturesque town nestled in the Portuguese countryside, Ethan Cole, dressed in a loose linen shirt and trousers, stood before a landscape he had painted, a satisfied smile on his face. He had painted it shortly after arriving, when his body was still weak and his technique unrefined, but he cherished it. He cherished all his paintings, framing each one himself and adding a personal inscription. They represented life. They represented freedom. The dark 3 years were supposedly far behind him, but in truth, they were like a cancer in his bones, a constant, gnawing presence. The ache in his old injuries on rainy days, the scars that no amount of money could erase, the gut-wrenching memories that surfaced on the anniversary of his father's death, they all robbed him of his peace. The only thing that had healed him was the small tea and art gallery he had opened in this foreign city. Here, no one knew who he was. No one judged his past. They only offered kind words, praising the beauty of his flowers, the fragrance of his tea, the charm of his small events, the skill of his brushwork. Only here could he be the carefree young man he was before his family's world fell apart. It was laughable, really. The persona Julian had tried so hard, and so poorly, to emulate, Isabelle's pen pal Cognito, was just Ethan being himself. He didn't know how Julian had gotten his hands on his letters with Isabelle, but he had only managed to copy the surface, not the substance, not the breeding, not the quiet confidence and talent that Robert Cole had nurtured in him with love and money. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves outside, disturbing the incense burning beside him. A bright, lovely figure walked up to him, bending down naturally to pick up a drawing that had fluttered to the floor. Her voice was as warm as the sun. "Your back is bad. Let me get that. Are we framing all of these?" Ethan couldn't help but smile when he saw her. "No, these are for Mr. Peterson next door. You want to see my new work?" Clara Sterling's gaze lingered on his smile for a moment before she nodded, a soft smile playing on her own lips. The place where Ethan now lived was not the small town where he had first fled. It was a carefully chosen enclave of expatriates that Clara had found for him, a place where he could live in peace. Most of the residents were elderly and offline. The younger ones knew his story and were compassionate enough to leave him be. Here, Ethan felt safe. Clara's presence in his life was a story in itself. Ethan had 2 pen pals. One was Isabelle. The other was Clara Sterling, who had sought him out after everything had happened. He hadn't discovered Isabelle's identity until just before he left the country. At the time, his mental state was so fragile, the thought that his most cherished childhood correspondent had been so tainted left him devastated. He felt utterly alone in the world, terrified to trust anyone ever again. So later, when he was working part-time in a cafe in Portugal and happened to meet Clara, he didn't dare reveal himself, afraid of being hurt again. But Clara recognized him first, from the distinctive script he used when writing out customers' wishes on small notes. That afternoon, as he was leaving work, she was waiting for him outside, wanting to finally meet in person. Ethan's reaction was extreme. He fled, his voice trembling as he told her to leave him alone. Clara respected his wishes, but she started coming to the cafe regularly, sometimes helping him with difficult customers who didn't speak the language. Gradually, Ethan lowered his guard and started to talk to her about his past. Perhaps because they were from the same country, and because they had shared so much through letters for years, they found an easy rapport. 2 months ago, on the pretext of celebrating his birthday, Clara took him on a train ride to this town. That day, Ethan was given the deed to this shop and a new life in this beautiful place. Clara presented him with a rare painting he had once mentioned wanting, a proud, happy smile on her face. "Ethan," she had said, "I know you're not comfortable in that other environment. So start your new life here. I'll be with you." In that moment, a crack appeared in Ethan's frozen heart. He had to admit that because of Isabelle, he had developed a harsh, unfair view of the world. Isabelle's personality had always been dark and guarded, even in her letters. But Clara, who came from a happy home, was her complete opposite. She was just like her writing, a ray of sunshine. She noticed his wariness around strangers and kept a respectful distance. She knew what he liked and understood what he feared. Over the past year, it was her companionship that had helped him emerge from the darkness. Clara went with Ethan to deliver the paintings. Mr. Peterson greeted them with a wide smile. His children were back in the States, and he was often lonely, so he would frequently invite Ethan over. Ethan, in turn, was fond of the gentle old man and enjoyed his company. Today, they talked about Mr. Peterson's children and his little granddaughter, and before they knew it, the sun had set. Mr. Peterson chuckled, a little embarrassed. Here I am, talking your ears off. You two should stay for dinner. Ethan froze, shaking his head quickly. Mr. Peterson, we're not a couple. We're just friends. The old man paused in the middle of pouring rice, his cloudy eyes looking back and forth between them before lighting up with understanding. He smiled. My mistake. Come, I'll make you my special mushroom and chicken congee. You can't find anything this good in a restaurant. Ethan's face flushed. He was about to get up to help when Clara stood, rolling up her sleeves. Her voice had a cheerful lilt. Grandpa Peterson, let me help you with the prep. Ethan can be in charge of the fruit plate. With his task assigned, Ethan gratefully sat back down. Mr. Peterson was short, and his furniture was custom-made to a lower height. Clara knew Ethan's back couldn't handle the bending, but as he watched her, dressed in a floral apron, expertly preparing the meal, he couldn't help but smile. Clara heard him and glanced over her shoulder. A happy curve to her lips. The dinner was a joyous affair. Seeing that Mr. Peterson was getting tired, Ethan and Clara said their goodbyes. The walk back was short. The warm summer evening was filled with the sound of children's laughter. Ethan, aware of the quiet presence beside him, thought of Mr. Peterson's words, of the knowing look in his eyes, and felt his ears grow hot. Thank you for today, he said softly. And I'm sorry we stayed so long at Mr. Peterson's. Don't pay any mind to what he said. But what if I want to pay it mind? Clara interjected suddenly, her voice a soft, tentative probe, laced with the shyness of a confession. Ethan didn't understand. What? Clara turned to face him, her eyes more serious than he had ever seen them. I said, Ethan, I like you. The world seemed to slow down. Her words were like a feather, tracing a line across his heart. A tickle that was not at all unpleasant. He had never imagined she would say something like that. His ears turned a shade redder. He had never been in a relationship. Before the bankruptcy, he was focused on his studies. After, he was focused on surviving Isabelle. He had never experienced even a day of romantic affection. His first instinct was to retreat. He lowered his voice. Clara, let's just pretend I didn't hear that. Can we not talk about this again? But this time, Clara, who had always deferred to him, refused to back down. She stepped closer, her gaze incredibly gentle. Ethan, I like you. I like you since I first read your words. I'm so glad that, out of curiosity, I joined that online program and became your pen pal. And I'm so sorry I couldn't find you sooner, when you needed someone the most, that you had to suffer so much. Ethan had stopped writing to his pen pals after his family's business collapsed. He simply didn't have a heart for it. Clara, who had been exchanging letters with him every 2 months, grew worried when her letters started being returned to sender. But because of the complexity of the situation and the privacy Ethan's father had always insisted upon, the addresses they used were virtual. It had taken her 3 long years of searching through fragments of their conversations to find him. It wasn't until his live stream that a sudden intuition told her he was the one she had been looking for. And in the process of helping him heal, she had fallen completely in love with him. As Clara finished her story, Ethan fell silent. The sheer volume of her confession had overloaded his senses. He didn't know what to say. Seeing his bewilderment, Clara instantly regretted her impulsiveness. She quickly added, I was just saying, it was too sudden of me. I want to try, Ethan said suddenly, his eyes bright as stars, fixed on hers. I've never been in a relationship. I don't know how to start one, but if you're willing to try with me. I'm willing. Clara cut in eagerly, nearly biting her tongue. Her earnestness made Ethan laugh, but his expression was still serious. First, you should know, I'm not exactly prime boyfriend material. If it doesn't work out between us, can we still be friends? His voice was tinged with a careful, pleading note. After his parents, Clara was the only person he was close to. The thought of losing her was unbearable. Thankfully, Clara nodded. Of course, we'll always be friends. Clara was a woman of her word. Ethan relaxed and tentatively reached for her hand. Clara's eyes lit up, her gaze so full of warmth that he had to look away. From that day on, Clara visited Ethan's shop more frequently. The gifts she brought became more numerous, too. Whenever Ethan felt uncomfortable and tried to refuse, she would reply with mock seriousness. I'm giving a gift to my boyfriend. It is my divine right. He couldn't argue with her, so he relented. But having grown up in a world of luxury, he knew the value of her gifts. A simple set of paintbrushes she gave him was worth $10,000. The brush holder was a handmade piece that cost over $1,000. While he was warmed by her generosity, a seed of unease began to grow in his heart. He had spent enough time in that gilded world to know how the wealthy thought. He didn't doubt Clara's sincerity, but he doubted whether her family would ever accept him, a man with almost nothing to his name. His thoughts were a tangled mess. He hated himself for overthinking, but he couldn't help it. After losing the protection of his family name, he had learned that vigilance was the only way to avoid being devoured whole. Fortunately, Clara seemed to sense his hesitation. That autumn, she suggested they return to the States so he could meet her family in Boston. Her tone was serious. "Ethan, I'm the eldest daughter of the Sterling family of Boston. I didn't tell you before because I didn't want to pressure you. Now, I want to take you home to meet my family. They already know and love my pen pal. When they find out my boyfriend is you, they'll be thrilled." The Sterling family of Boston. A century of history, immense wealth, on par with the Van Cess. Ethan had never imagined Clara came from such a background. But then again, it made sense. She had an innate grace, the quiet confidence of someone who had received the best education. Her writing, even as a child, had possessed a maturity beyond her years. He wasn't entirely surprised. Under Clara's expectant gaze, Ethan agreed. Clara was so happy, she looked like she might jump for joy. But mindful of his condition, she restrained herself, a playful smile on her face. "Great. I'll pick you up on my jet tomorrow." As she turned, she stumbled, nearly falling into a flower bed, and coughed in embarrassment. Her antics made Ethan laugh. He was about to say something when the sky suddenly opened up in a torrential downpour. He checked the weather forecast on his phone. Didn't it say today was supposed to be the hottest day of the year? How is it suddenly raining? Clara was just as puzzled. But with the rain coming down in sheets, it was impossible to leave. She looked at Ethan expectantly. He sighed in defeat. "You should stay the night. There's another room." As he spoke the last few words, his voice grew quieter and his ears turned red. Normally, Clara would have teased him, but she was so surprised he had agreed that her own face flushed a shade redder than his, her bright eyes dancing with joy. "I'll go make up the bed for you," Ethan said, heading inside. The shop was a converted residential house. It had 2 bedrooms. Ethan used the master, and the guest room, its bed covered in plastic, served as storage. He realized too late that he only had bedding for his own bed. He found a set of new, pale gray sheets that he thought Clara might like. "This set is new. I washed it but haven't used it yet." "You." Crack. A loud clap of thunder shook the house, and Ethan flinched. Ever since the abuse, loud noises made his heart pound. He was about to reassure Clara that he was fine when he met her gentle, understanding gaze. His heart seemed to lose its rhythm, beating a new, unsteady tune. Clara gently squeezed his hand. "I think I'm a little scared of thunder. Dear Mr. Cole, would you stay with me tonight?" She didn't mention his reaction, instead phrasing her request in a way he couldn't refuse. Ethan smiled and nodded. Okay. That night, they slept in the master bedroom. Ethan was in his bed, and Clara was on a fold-out cot, at her insistence. Even though the cot was hard and uncomfortable, she stubbornly claimed it was the perfect width for her. Ethan knew she was worried he would hurt his back on it. She was always so thoughtful, so considerate of him. His heart warmed. For dinner, he made hot pot, and, as a surprise, he baked her an egg tart for dessert. He had discovered her love for pastries on one of their outings. Sure enough, at the dinner table, her eyes lit up, and her happy smile was infectious. Looking at her, Ethan, who had come to dread bad weather, especially thunderstorms, suddenly wasn't afraid anymore. Later, back in a room, they lay on their separate beds, facing each other, talking for hours. They were so tired the next day that they both fell asleep on the plane, their heads leaning against each other. Before they landed, Ethan's watch vibrated, a silent alarm he had set. He carefully moved Clara's head so he could get up and change. As he stood, a hand grabbed his arm. Clara's sleepy voice murmured, "We still have an hour before we land. Why are you up already?" "I'm going to change," he said, adjusting her neck pillow. "Go back to sleep. I'll be right back." "You don't have to," she mumbled, her eyes half closed. "They don't care about that stuff." She rustled through her bag and pulled out a set of new clothes. "But I did buy you a new suit. My mom loves this style. I wasn't sure about your size, though, so it might not be comfortable." She handed him the clothes and promptly fell back asleep. Ethan looked at her, his heart melting. After the bankruptcy, he had stopped wearing formal clothes. It had been over 4 years. He wasn't used to it anymore. Clara didn't want him to change because she was worried he would feel uncomfortable. But she also respected his desire to make a good impression and had already found a way to help him do it. He felt a profound sense of happiness. Half an hour later, when he returned to his seat, Clara was already gathering their things. "Clara, can you check this for me? Does anything look out of place?" he asked, smoothing down the fabric. When she didn't answer, he looked up and found her staring at him, completely entranced. He had never been the subject of such an intense, direct gaze. He felt a blush creep up his neck and cleared his throat. "Clara, please check. If something's wrong, I need to go change." But she simply took his hand, her voice filled with sincere admiration. "With those gold-rimmed glasses that suit, it's a completely different look for you. I really like it." Her earnestness warmed his heart, and his smile grew wider. Ethan knew Clara's family was meeting them at the airport, but he never expected her parents to come themselves. He was touched and a little flustered. To his surprise, when Clara's mother saw him, her eyes filled with tears. "He looks so much like her," she kept murmuring. "So much like her." Ethan was bewildered. He looked at Clara for an explanation, but she seemed just as confused. It was Clara's father, a man with a kind smile and an air of quiet authority, who broke the tension and ushered them into the car. Clara started to get in the back with them, but was shooed to the front by her mother. In the end, Ethan found himself sitting next to her. Clara's mother looked at the nervous young man beside her, her smile growing warmer. "Ethan, I believe I'm your aunt." Ethan froze, his head snapping up to look at the elegant, well-preserved woman who looked to be in her late 30s. Her eyes, they were just like the eyes of the woman in the photograph of his mother. He knew Clara's current mother was her stepmother. He also knew that her biological parents had divorced amicably when she was young, but he never imagined this. He asked tentatively, "My mother's name was Catherine Monroe. Are you her sister?" The woman's smile softened further. She looked at him as if he were her own child. "Yes, we were twins, but we were adopted into different families, so we haven't seen each other a long time. My name is Victoria Sterling now." She paused, her eyes filling with sympathy. "You've suffered so much all these years." As Victoria's words washed over him, she pulled him into a warm embrace, and Ethan's eyes filled with tears. But his emotions remained tightly controlled. He had endured too much pain, too much injustice, to ever express himself freely again. Victoria gently patted his back, waiting patiently for his silent tears to subside. When he finally pulled away, she couldn't stop looking at him, a sense of wonder in her eyes. "Ethan, Clara has always adored her pen pal. The two of you getting together feels like family coming home. I'm so happy." She glanced at Clara, who was watching them in the rearview mirror, and added, "But if, one day, she doesn't treat you right, and you don't want to be with her anymore, you will still be my son." Clara let out an exasperated sigh. "Mom, he's the first boyfriend I've ever managed to land." Victoria laughed. "Now that I have my nephew, you and your father will have to take a back seat." Clara's father, overhearing this, cleared his throat and exchanged a look of mock resignation with his daughter. Watching this warm, loving family, the knot of fear and anxiety that had been lodged in Ethan's chest for years finally began to dissolve. After his mother died, his father had done his best, but their home was incomplete. He was a busy man, and Ethan had been raised mostly by nannies in a quiet, somber house. In the Vance home, he had never felt a single moment of warmth. Now, seeing the easy affection of the Sterling family, he felt as if he had stepped into another world. He thought, "It's so good. I finally have a family again." The car stopped in front of the Sterling villa. A middle-aged woman and a little girl of about 7 or 8 were waiting outside. The moment they got out of the car, the little girl let go of the woman's hand and ran into Victoria's arms. "Mommy, you're back," she chirped. Victoria gently stroked her hair and gestured toward Ethan. The little girl looked at him, her dark, grape-like eyes, so similar to Clara's, filled with curiosity and immediate liking. With her mother's encouragement, she walked up to him and formally introduced herself. "Hello, handsome brother. I'm my sister's sister, Lily." Her seriousness made Ethan laugh. He bent down and formally shook her hand. Then he looked up at the woman who had approached him, a person of understated power and a warm smile. "Hello, I'm Clara's birth mother. You can call me Diana Richmond." She extended a hand, and Ethan quickly took it, his posture respectful. Diana's smile was genuine. "No need to be so formal. As a mother, I'm thrilled that you and Clara are together. She's been fond of you for many years, you know." Ethan's ears were burning. Clara's family was far kinder and more welcoming than he could have ever imagined. Especially Diana and Victoria, standing together, one fire, one water, yet perfectly harmonious. Clara leaned in and whispered, "When my dad had his midlife crisis and chased after my Aunt Victoria for years, he sent me to live with my mom so I wouldn't be in the way. But on their wedding night, my dad slept in the guest room while my mom and Aunt Victoria stayed up all night talking. The next day, when my dad complained, my mom said she and Victoria had a special connection and were sisters from now on. As she spoke, her father, who was standing nearby, looked utterly defeated. Ethan nudged Clara. "Your dad looks a little down. Shouldn't you go comfort him?" Clara glanced over and shook her head, suppressing a laugh. "No need. He's been like that ever since my mom and aunt became best friends." Her father's expression grew even more mournful. That evening, the welcome dinner was held at a new restaurant owned by Diana and her current husband. It was a joyous meal, and for the first time, Ethan felt what it was like to be treasured. Dishes he liked were subtly moved in front of him. Whenever he spoke, everyone would put down their chopsticks and listen intently, even Clara's energetic little sister. Flavors he disliked were nowhere to be found. Clara had already informed the kitchen. Everyone, in their own way, was helping him feel at ease. A new thought bloomed in his heart. Marrying Clara would be a very good thing. He was not a naive young man anymore. His disastrous marriage had left a permanent scar on his soul. He never wanted to be part of a toxic family again. After dinner, they all went their separate ways. Since Clara had been living abroad for years and her apartment in the city wasn't ready, she and Ethan stayed at the Sterling family home. The moment he walked in, the familiar decor made his eyes well up. Perhaps because Victoria and his mother were sisters, their tastes in interior design were remarkably similar. The Sterling home felt, in many ways, like his own childhood home, stirring up a wave of painful memories. After Ethan explained, Victoria's expression turned somber. "My sister and I were separated when we were 10, she sighed. "I never realized the bond of blood could be so strong." She pulled him into another hug. "Tonight, you can sleep in the same wing as your uncle. He can tell you stories about Clara when she was little." "Dad, don't you dare. I have an image to maintain." Victoria laughed and pushed Lily into her arms. "You can look after your sister tonight." With that, she and Clara's father led Ethan away. But when it was time for bed, they didn't say a word, simply letting the exhausted young man sleep. Despite being in a strange place, Ethan had the most restful night's sleep he'd had in years. Sometime in the deep of the night, as he hovered between dream and wakefulness, he felt someone gently unbutton his collar, a trembling hand tracing the scars on his chest. Then a single tear fell into his hair. He frowned slightly and pulled the covers tighter around him. Ethan's life at the Sterling home was idyllic. He slept in, ate his favorite foods, and spent his days fishing with Clara's father. In the evenings, Clara would show him the city's hidden gems. Knowing he preferred quiet, she canceled her plans to introduce him to her friends and instead took him to every museum, gallery, and park that piqued his interest. Soon after, through Clara's grandfather, Ethan began studying under an internationally renowned master of calligraphy and painting. Surrounded by the love of the Sterling family, Ethan finally, truly began to heal. But a part of him was still restless. He needed to go home, to visit his parents' graves, to see the place where he grew up. He was terrified of running into Isabelle again. He hadn't looked up any news about the Vance family since his live stream, but he knew they must have suffered greatly, and that they would blame him for all of it. As the anniversary of his father's death approached, his insomnia returned. He spent his nights sitting alone in his room, staring into the darkness. One night, unable to bear the turmoil in his heart, he got up to walk around the quiet house. He saw a light on in the study and heard Clara and her father talking. He heard his own name. He crept to the door and listened. "You resurrected your stake in the family business just for Ethan," her father was saying. "I have to say, I'm impressed." He stubbed out his cigarette. "I remember when I asked you to take over Sterling Industries, you refused, even gave your shares to your sister. I thought you were going to be a travel blogger for the rest of your life." Clara's voice was different from her usual cheerful tone. It was serious, with the same deep cadence as her father's. "I will have both my dreams in him," she said, reviewing a document. "Taking over the business is temporary. I need the family's power to do what needs to be done. Ethan is not comfortable in this country right now. Once the Vance situation is resolved and our international operations are stable, I will hand everything over to Lily." Her father laughed. "They say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. But you, my daughter, are even bolder than I am. In your first month as CEO, you managed to dismantle several of the Vance Corporation's major business lines, right under the noses of all those old fossils on the board." "The Vances." Ethan's grip on the doorframe tightened, his mind reeling. Clara let out a cold laugh. Just making her lose her reputation and unable to find Ethan wasn't enough. She wanted to expand her market overseas. "I made sure that would never happen." Her father watched her for a long moment. "Be careful," he said gently. "You've used the family's resources to build a global firewall around Ethan's location. A lot of people are unhappy about it. Don't overplay your hand. Clara raised an eyebrow. When you were pursuing Mom, were you this cautious? Her father immediately retorted, that was different. My wife deserves the best. Who cares what those old fools have to say? Realizing his own words had trapped him, he let out an exasperated laugh and clapped his daughter on the shoulder. Clara smiled. Mom had a rough time after she was adopted. She didn't start living like a princess until she met you. You're always wondering how to make her happier, right? Well, here's your chance. Just be good to my boyfriend. Her father considered this, then nodded, a look of genuine satisfaction on his face. You've got my spirit. All right, do what you need to do. I'll back you up. When Clara emerged from the study, she found Ethan waiting for her at the top of the stairs, his eyes glistening with tears. Ethan, you... Clara Sterling, let's get married. Clara couldn't believe her ears. What did you say? I said, Clara Sterling, let's get married. Ethan's voice was like a warm spring breeze, sending an arrow straight into her heart. She threw herself into his arms, her eyes shining with excitement. Ethan, I didn't quite hear you. Can you say it again? Her playful silliness made him laugh. I said, let's get married. What? She asked, leaning closer, her eyes crinkling at the corners. I said, let's get married, he repeated, his smile widening. What? Say it one more time. She wrapped her arms around his neck, her lips drawing closer and closer to his. Finally, it was Ethan who leaned in, closing the distance between them. Clara Sterling, he whispered against her lips, thank you for loving me. I love you so much, too. Let's get married. Clara pulled him closer, deepening the kiss. In the darkness, her happy tears mingled with his, shining like stars. They were married shortly after. Ethan had developed a fear of cameras after his live stream, so the grand wedding Clara had fantasized about in her letters was not to be. But that was okay. Ethan had kept every letter she had ever sent him. He designed a full suite of jewelry and a wedding gown for her, inspired by her descriptions, a permanent keepsake of her dream. They used them for a private photo shoot, a beautiful substitute for a ceremony. Afterward, Clara took him to the Sterling ancestral home. There he met the entire Sterling clan, the main branch, the extended family, everyone. It was a large, thriving family, united and without the backstabbing and intrigue of the Van Cess. Everyone knew his story, but no one looked at him with pity. They simply welcomed him into their family. Ethan, who had always been terrified of large gatherings, found himself completely at ease. He was officially entered into the family records, becoming a true Sterling. The whole experience felt like a dream, one he was afraid he would wake up from at any moment. But then Clara squeezed his hand, and his heart settled. He made a decision. He would move to Boston. He would be with the Sterlings forever. The whole family was overjoyed, but no one was happier than his old neighbor, Mr. Peterson. As it turned out, his son was a business partner of the Sterling family, and had recently moved his father back to Boston to be with him. Ethan and Clara went to pick him up from the airport. Mr. Peterson beamed at them. I told you you two were a couple. They both blushed, then looked at each other and smiled. That evening, for the final leg of their journey, they flew to Ethan's hometown to arrange for his parents' remains to be moved to Boston. On the plane, Clara finally told him what had become of the Van Cess. The Vance Corporation went bankrupt. Arthur's crimes were exposed. He died when his car went off a cliff while he was trying to flee. Marcus Thorne and his associates are all in prison. Julian couldn't bear the humiliation and killed himself in his cell. As for Isabelle, after failing to save the company, she was diagnosed with terminal lung and stomach cancer. She doesn't have long. Ethan listened in silence. After a long time, he said simply they got what they deserved. As he was leaving the cemetery, he saw Isabelle arriving to purchase a burial plot. She was skeletal, so frail that she coughed up blood as she spoke to the groundskeeper. Please, she rasped, bury my ashes next to Robert and Catherine Cole, so that he might come to visit me. The groundskeeper frowned and pointed to Ethan and Clara, who were walking away in the distance. I'm sorry, ma'am. Their son was just here. He's had their remains moved. Said he's settling down somewhere else and never coming back. Isabelle looked at the two figures, their arms wrapped around each other, and a single tear of blood slid down her cheek. She didn't even have the right to be near him in death. She lowered her head, and with a final, shuddering breath, she was gone.